Dear doctoral candidate, members of the Defense Committee, opponents, EBS academic community, all the guests, it's my sincere pleasure to open the defense of the doctoral thesis by Marge Sassi. Her thesis is titled Organizational Performance Evaluation in Cultural and Creative Industries Organizations, the example of Estonia. The supervisors of Marge Sassi are Dr. Ülle Pihlak from Estonian Business School and Professor Toomas Haldma from the University of Tartu, Estonia. The opponents for the thesis in today's defense are Professor Annick Schramme from the Antwerp Management School, Belgium, who will join us online, and Professor Martin Piber from the University of Innsbruck, Austria, who we welcome here at EBS. And the Defense Committee is composed of the two opponents and me, Katri Kerem, from Estonian Business School. Let me shortly outline the procedure for today. It will be as follows. The Secretary of the Defense Committee, Kaisa Lindenburg, will confirm that the candidate has completed all the steps required for the thesis defense, and Kaisa will also summarize the CV of the doctoral candidate for the audience. After that, Marge will have 20 minutes to introduce her thesis to the audience. After that, we will have an academic debate by the two opponents. Both of them have about 25 to 30 minutes, and we will start with Dr. Schramme and then Professor Piber. After the academic debate, the audience has a chance to ask the questions, and me as a committee member, should I have any. We will take the questions both from the virtual audience and also from the audience in class or in the EBS hall. And the first part of the defense will be concluded by a short speech by the supervisor of the doctoral candidate, Professor Toomas Haldma. With that, the first part of the defense procedure is over, and we will ask the audience to leave the room for the voting process, and the online broadcast will be closed for this time. And after about 15 or so minutes, we will invite everyone back to join us for announcing the official outcome of the defense. And now I will give floor to Kaisa Lindenburg for the official words.
Honorable chairperson of the committee, members of the committee, supervisors, and the defendant. Marge Sassi has presented all the documents that are necessary according to the procedure for successful completion of the doctoral program and defense of EBS. She has presented the thesis titled Organizational Performance Evaluation in Cultural and Creative Industries Organizations, the example of Estonia. The set of documents which Marge Sassi has presented also contains a copy of her master's diploma from Estonian Academy of Music and Theatre. Marge Sassi has fulfilled the requirements of the curriculum of doctoral studies in management to defend the doctoral thesis and acquired the necessary amount of credit points. On August 16, 2021, the Research and Development Council of Estonian Business School admitted Marge Sassi to defend the dissertation for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Management. The council also set the date of the defense. The defense committee of Marge Sassi's doctoral thesis was confirmed with the rector's decree number 22U on October 19, 2021. Marge Sassi has presented her academic CV. It is the following. She was born in Estonia on July 14, 1977. She received the degree of Master of Arts in Culture Management in 2013 from Estonian Academy of Music and Theatre. the degree of Master of Arts in European Studies in 2004 from University of Tartu, and the degree of Bachelor of Arts in Information Science from Tallinn Pedagogical University. Marge Sassi was enrolled as a doctoral student and junior researcher in Estonian Business School in 2014 and has by now completed the program. Marge Sassi started her professional career as a project manager in Tallinn Pedagogical University. She continued in the Ministry of Social Affairs as a chief specialist and as a project coordinator in the International Organization for Migration. From 2017, she has been working in the European Commission, and in addition, from 2021, as a development manager in the Tallinn City Museum. Marge Sassi has published 8 articles, presented in 13 conferences, supervised 4 master's theses in Estonian Business School. Current doctoral dissertation is based on 4 academic publications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaisa. And now it is time for Marge to present her thesis in the next 20 minutes. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Honorable committee, dear supervisors, supporters here and online, I'm very happy to present you my doctoral thesis on organization and performance evaluation in culture and creative industries in Estonia today. First, the agenda. I start by introducing the key terminology. Then the purpose and research objects are introduced. It is very important to indicate the research gap and how the research questions were developed from them. Also, the theoretical model is presented, the research design, how the 4 articles were composed, what were the triggers, how they were interrelated. Then it's time for findings, discussions, conclusions, and unfortunately also the limitations and some recommendations. 2 key concepts used in my thesis are culture and creative industries, CCI, and throughout the thesis I used the terminology or the definition from Estonian Ministry of Culture, which is the following: an economic sector that is based on individual and collective creativity, skills and talent, and is capable of creating welfare and jobs through the generation and use of intellectual property. Organizational performance evaluation, thus OPE, has been defined by different authors in many different ways. For my thesis, I kind of tried to unite the core elements of them and adapt it to the cultural and creative industries. Thus, the definition used is conscious strategic process that takes the specifics of a particular CCI organization into account while using the regular analysis of previous organizational performance and as an input for planning the future performance of that particular CCI organization. As already mentioned, research object of my thesis is organizational performance evaluation in culture and creative industries, in culture and creative organizations, and the purpose was twofold. First, to analyze the different factors that affect attitudes towards and the implementation of OPE in CCI organizations in order to develop a model explaining internal and external factors affecting the usage of OPE in CCI organizations. After having stated the purpose, let me introduce you how this purpose was achieved achieved through the existing research gap, and research questions were developed based on them. So basically, what we currently know is that heterogeneity of organizations does impact the organization's managerial specifics, and we also know that performance management, not performance evaluation, but performance management as such, does affect the practices. Nevertheless, there are no very specific information on how this is relevant to culture and creative industries. This is why the first research question was developed or was defined following: how do OPA tools and practices differ in different types of CCI organizations, as CCI is considered very heterogeneous and rather fragmented. What we also know from the literature is that both the mindset and the experience of managers does affect their managerial tools. We also know that in culture and creative industries, kind of a here and now style of management is practiced. Therefore, I was eager to find out, as a second research question, how are OPA practices affected by strategic management attitudes in CCI organizations. Here is kind of a turning point, because until this point, the whole sample was used. And from the second research question on, I was eager to go more into the details and had a specific subsample as an interest group for me. What is known is that practicing OPA in some countries is very directly related to the state support. Basically, in order to receive state report, organizations need to present some evaluation results. But we also know that in spite of this demand, decision-making in culture and creative industries is less rational than in more traditional businesses, which led me to the third research question: what factors affect the implementation and perception of OPA in CCI organizations? The fourth research question is specific to those organizations who do not practice OPA. And why? Because even though we know that organizational performance evaluation does lead or does contribute to the success of the organizations, but we also know is the fact that it is still not widespread among CCI. Which led me to the question, which factors deter CCI organizations from practicing OPA and how? Why don't they measure, even if it sounds rather promising and needed? What we also know is that CCI organizations are constantly struggling with achieving the big picture or the balance. Nevertheless, they are hardly in balance, strategic balance, which made me curious and led to formulation of the fifth research question: what do CCI organizations need in order to be strategically balanced? I do admit that this figure is perhaps rather complex, and I don't expect you to I only expect you to take a look of the thesis, but I very, very quickly sum it up. This just shows the variety of variables that were taken into consideration, that were rooted from the literature, and that I measured throughout my empirical study. So let us start from the top. Different institution-based, resource-based, and industry-based factors were under focus in my third study. Challenges, skills gaps, number of employees, organizational form, age of organizations and subsectors were also expected to influence OPA in CCI, and also different kinds of attitudes, practices, and in my last study, I focused mainly on the creative freedom and survival challenges. How the study was composed. As it took me 7 years, I paid quite a lot of attention to the literature review, but not only. Systematic review was also done. And why so? Mainly because from Estonian part, there is no much academic evidence available. Therefore, they were kind of a gray literature or reports that were used to understand or give the background of the Estonian context. After having done this, the research gaps were found, selected, and based on that, the research questions were formulated. Now I will, one by one, very shortly introduce the design of each study. First 3 studies were planned in order to answer one research question, while the 4th study helped me to understand and find answers to the 2 research questions. So in my first study, I was eager to understand the challenges and skills gaps in culture and creative industries organizations. The sample consisted of nearly 500 organizations and descriptive statistics, some cross tables, and correlation analysis was used. The second study focused on the attitudes and practices of strategic management. The same sample was used, but analysis was more profound. Factor analysis and cluster analysis were applied. Third study measured the rationality, especially in those organizations who were proven by the second study to apply or benefit from organizational performance evaluation. The 4th study used both quantitative and qualitative data and focused on second sub-sample, which was the evaluation hesitant organizations, and targeted the relations between creative freedom, survival challenges, OPE, and also was accompanied with some interviews with the managers in order to understand the obstacles to achieve this balance, strategic balance. What did I find out? The first study of mine showed that some tools widely used in other CCI organizations are not used in Estonian organizations. And surprisingly, it is expected by our CCI organizations that the organizations should not go and ask for feedback, rather the stakeholders should come and give feedback. Quite a passive approach. I was also finding out that challenges affecting OPE differ the most based on the organizational form and subsector, while the skills gaps differ the most based on the age of the organization and subsector. The second study revealed that the strategic management depends on available resources and attitudes. In the second study, I also understood that even though CCI is one business sector, we can't really speak about one coherent industry. Therefore, it made sense to divide it into the evaluation-friendly and evaluation-hesitant organizations. Evaluation-friendly organizations that are evaluation-friendly, are really practicing it. Additionally to this, they are really development-oriented and eager to be internationally competitive. While the opposite kind of organizations, evaluation-hesitant ones, are not profit-oriented at all and do not have any kind of written strategy documents. Third third research question helped me to understand what does it take to be evaluation-friendly. What characterizes these organizations that are practicing OPE? And quite a long list consisting of 5 variables describe these organizations. First of all, they are enthusiastic. They don't find challenging to analyze and report. They have these skills. Their organization is oriented to expand and also to learn and develop, and they're rather confident in regard of income. The 4th study revealed that low level of survival challenges accompanied with high level of creative freedom leads to practicing OPE, especially in those organizations who really are not doing evaluation constantly or in an acknowledged way. 5th research question and findings to this highlight the powerful and central role of the managers. who are the deciders how and if to evaluate, and what does it take to be balanced, and professionalism of the sector as such. Planning and indicators is also something that is from one side really needed. It's acknowledged that it's needed, but on the other hand, it is not always done in a detailed way as expected from the funders, for instance. And stable funding is also the key. Okay, after having presented what did I find out, I can't unfortunately say that now all is clear. Now we know how it's done. Therefore, some things from the literature I would like to highlight that are still questioning, are still interest of me. For instance, it has been said that organizational performance evaluation kind of distracts managers, but also stakeholders from their core business. Okay, but how can we approach OPE as not being the core business? When we actually know that it contributes to success, stability, lets the organizations to be more stable, why isn't it so far the core business yet? And I don't have the answer, but under the implications, I will suggest what could be done to change it. Jeff Cutt and Pratt have highlighted that in practice, most managers in CCI organizations do not have either a core task or competence in management. This is kind of a constantly repeating finding or thing that I came across through all these 4 studies, that there is no competence available. And this is also something that perhaps on a state level should be addressed. And less attention is paid to the practical side of production than in the more traditional industries. The question is also, why is it like that? Why do we focus on symbolic value only? Why the creativity and enthusiasm are kind of overestimated when this doesn't contribute to success that much? And I have highlighted one of the discussion points here, which is having skills gap in all core functions of management in Estonian CCI organizations seems rather risky situation to me. So I would say that something needs to be done as up. And to conclude this discussion part of mine, it was 5 years before I was born when it was said that an ideal organization is self-evaluating and therefore continuously monitoring its own activities so as to determine whether it was meeting its goals or whether these goals should even prevail. 47, nearly 50 years have been passed and we are still not there. I wonder why. So, the implications of my findings. First of all, I would suggest to develop strategy toolbox and most probably through trainings so that it would be possible to overcome this lack of competencies, skills gap that is existing in the CCI. And also supporting infrastructure and stability in funding would help the organizations to help themselves. What has been always in my mind, okay, not always, last 7 years, is to design a CCI-specific performance evaluation tool for Estonian CCI organizations. It's still on my mind, that it's still relevant, and perhaps I just take a one-minute comment outside this presentation, saying that actually last Friday I was participating in a meeting, a training of Ministry of Culture, and actually first steps are taken to develop this kind of tool, so I'm very happy for this. And perhaps these findings also help to develop the CCI development strategy that in strategic kind of a setting does not exist yet. Conclusion and then the limitations. Perhaps the most important conclusion is that CCI organizations that are strategically driven are doing better. They are just doing better. They have less challenges than those organizations who do not pay so much attention to the strategy. The second important conclusion is that if the environment is too difficult, too competitive, then it's just too much for these CCI organizations, and they are not so eager to practice OPE anymore. The last two conclusions, the first one is relevant to the evaluation-friendly organizations only, and it is that CCI organizations where the staff are profit-oriented are more likely to have a positive perception of OPE. Not necessarily the practice, but at least they feel it's needed. And the last conclusion about the evaluation-hesitant organizations is that these organizations that do not yet practice evaluation are actually the organization that would need it the most in order to overcome the struggle between creative freedom and survival challenges. And finally, the limitations and ideas for further research. I have to admit that data collection was only on a self-reporting basis only. No only the organizational representatives themselves could express how they are doing and why they are doing what they're doing. Also, the validity of methods in some stages could be partly questionable. The terminology, especially in the quantitative survey, was left to be self-interpretive in this sense that some definitions were used and left undefined, so that there is a slight possibility that the respondents could interpret them differently. The reliability of the results, as it was anonymous, you could always also question. And the basis of when I started this journey was that organization performance evaluation is not widely used in Estonia, which might have made me see this, because it was quite a strong belief from my side. Nevertheless, it's rooted in the master thesis. And ideas for the further research. First of all, in my thesis, in my survey, I did not ask concretely about how well the organizations are financially doing. In case I could start from scratch, I definitely would. And I would also like to add more variables to my research, because it can actually be that the world is not that easy and there are more combinations of variables, more variables that they didn't tackle, but actually affect OPE. And in spite of that all, I still don't know why OPE tools are not used in Estonia. I know why it's not widely practiced, but these existing tools that are available, that are for free, that you could just download and start using, I still don't know. And this kind of sad remark, I don't want to continue to end. This is why kind of a more positive quote coming from Margaret Mead, who has inspired me a lot, is that all social change comes from the passion of individuals. There is so much passion available in culture and creative industries, in those organizations that I visited, that I really hope that when there is some little bit of compassion and passion from state level as well, we are able to bring a big change about, perhaps not quickly, but in small steps, so that the industry could grow, improve, and be more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marge, for this clear and well-given presentation. And now it's my sincere pleasure to give floor to our opponent, Professor Annick Schramme, who will join us virtually. So, Annick, the floor is yours for starting your side of the debate and comments. Please.
Thank you very much. Dear PhD candidate, first I want to thank you for the invitation to be part of the jury of the PhD candidate Marge Sassi. Also, thank you for giving the opportunity to organize the PhD defense in a hybrid way. I would have much preferred to attend in person, but in these challenging times, we need to be pragmatic. Congratulations to the PhD candidate with all the work you have done for the application of the award of PhD entitled The Organizational Performance Evaluation in Cultural and Creative Industries Organizations, the example of Estonia. You analyzed the different factors that affect attitudes towards an implementation of OP, Organization Performance Evaluation, in CCI organizations, and you developed a model describing internal and external factors affecting the use of OP in CCI organizations. The separate articles are well written. Your proposed PhD is well structured and systematic in its presentation. The series of arguments and the correlation between the different variables are interesting. However, it is not always clear where the arguments you try to make for the overall trajectory in your proposed PhD emerged from and how they are made in a consistent way, despite the changes you made. Therefore, I have some questions for you. The first ones are more general methodological questions, and then I have some more specific questions. So, my first question is related to your methodology. You use a two-phase mixed methods strategy of quantitative and qualitative research. However, the first three of the included articles are primarily quantitative, and the last article provides a more qualitative balance. As you said already, you collected data with a survey from 460 CCI representatives. Subsequently, 8 CCI managers were interviewed for the qualitative data. However, there remains, in my opinion, an imbalance between the quantitative and the qualitative part. In order to assure anonymity, limited demographic data were found from the respondents of the quantitative study. There is also a lack of information about the profiles of the 8 interviewees. Therefore, I was wondering what was their profile, how you selected them, and how you analyzed the qualitative interviews. Please.
Thank you, Professor Schramme, for these questions. I do agree. There was some imbalance, which I discovered after having published the third article, which made me to involve the interviews in order to bring some balance to the fourth study. The interviewees, the 8 interviewees, were selected in a following way. I targeted the same 460 organizations that had responded to my survey, and I contacted them 3 years later, asking if they would be willing to participate in the final stage of my research in order to also answer the why questions. As the quantitative part was focused mainly on the how part, I was eager to find out also why. And we had some, profound discussions there. Out of these 460 organizations that I contacted, 5 agreed to have interviews. We had nice interviews with them, and additionally to this, I also involved an umbrella organization, Cultural Endowment, and 2 more organizations that had not been participated in the study. So it's kind of a mix. And perhaps what is also perhaps important is that in these 8 interviews, spiral thinking was applied in this sense that also the questions slightly developed, hopefully to the best, because the questions to the cultural endowment, for instance, they were broader and trying to understand the context better. So the profile, actually, to be honest, I do remember there was a profile presented in the thesis. But it was not in a table format, but it was one sentence where the organizations and types of them were mentioned. What I remember right now that the music industry was represented, performing arts, Yes. So basically, to conclude, the profiles were organizations that were eager to speak about this topic and how these interviews were analyzed. And they were analyzed using the voice files. I didn't transcribe the interviews, but technology was used for that. The codes were driven from this data, and as a result of this, the obstacles to strategic balance were highlighted through content analysis. Right? I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you for this clarification. I have some other methodological questions, but because of the time, I will move forward to more specific questions. My next questions is related to the causation and effectuation logic. Your PhD, and you write that also on page 64, relies on the causation logic, namely strategic thinking on the longer term with clear goals and evaluation systems, which is actually not typical for the CCI organizations. I have conducted previous research based on the entrepreneurial attitude of the CCI, and one of the main findings was that CCI organizations are much more driven by effectuation logic than by causation logic. Certainly, in a VUCA world, a very uncertain and volatile world, CCIs need to be agile and flexible, and therefore the effectuation logic fits better with their way of working, that is characterized by looking at opportunities in the present and at project-based collaborations based on trust and complementarity. CCI are also characterized by creativity and innovation. Innovation is the capability of breaking through the institutional logic in a certain industry rather than following the institutional logic, what you define as one of the factors for using OP. So, does the use of OP not conflict with the capability to innovate and with the specific characteristics of a CCI organization?
Thank you very much for this. Now I'm in a very difficult position because answering from the perspective of my thesis and answering based on the last 5 months when working in Tallinn City Museum, I would provide rather different answers. First of all, theory and practice are slightly different. So first of all, about the fact if the daily existence can actually be somehow squeezed into the box, and how much rules can actually benefit the organizations. From theoretical perspective, I would say that it's needed in a longer term. It might be perhaps annoying, difficult to cope with on a daily basis, but in a longer run, literature has proven that it makes sense. And in case any kind of new strategic tool is introduced to a company, it is definitely very difficult in the beginning, but when it comes a habit, a daily routine, it's beneficial. In case I may quickly comment my last 5 months in Tallinn City Museum, then this doesn't work. This doesn't work like this. And I haven't done any research on this yet, but most probably I underestimated a little bit the creative nature of this stuff. I was perhaps thinking throughout my studies, not only as a researcher, but kind of a business-oriented PhD student. And these last 5 months have made me see this slightly differently. Concerning the causality, I have to admit that I was triggered by the fact that this research field is mainly dominated by the qualitative approach. And this is also one of the reasons why I continued throughout my first 3 studies on quantitative approach, because originally, when I started my journey, and it can also be seen from this list of conference presentations, my first conference presentation was about action research. So basically, this is how I planned to do my research: be in organizations, introduce a tool, and test it. So no real causality was planned more than for the first research stage. But this quantitative data turned out to be more promising and richer, and I was triggered to find out more. And perhaps each step of analysis led me to kind of a deeper and deeper understanding, not only what's happening in the sector, but also what might be the reasons behind it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I understand that it is related indeed to the genesis of your PhD. So let's move to the next question. My next question is about the differences between subsectors in relation to the creative freedom and the business logic. You claim that one of the main contributions of your research is the development of characteristics of 5 clusters of CCI organizations in Estonia. One of the characteristics in the model that you developed are the differences between subsectors. This heterogeneity of the CCI is also recognized in answering your first research questions. When we look at your data, there is seemingly an overrepresentation of libraries and an underrepresentation of music industry. How did that affect your results, and is it possible to draw from your data also some more subsector-specific conclusions, please?
Thank you very much for this. I was eager myself also to conclude more and kind of compare different subsectors. First, I answer about this overrepresentation. In the second study of mine, the organizations were weighted. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Basically, different weight was given based on this sample from 2011 from the main mapping survey officially done by Estonian Konjunktuurinstituut, economic research institution. So basically, I would say that I had this kind of threat or risk in mind, and this was taken into under consideration. Concerning the differences between different subsectors, first study indicated that these differences are rather big. And most probably the most intriguing finding for me was that, for instance, in the field of architecture, which is well represented, they are very eager to collect data, but not really analyze it. While, for instance, in performing arts, it was the other way around. I have had some thoughts about continuously keeping analyzing my data and drawing also some subsectoral conclusions that most probably the industry would benefit. On the other hand, even though I'm very eager to do that, and perhaps this is also something that should have been mentioned, how under the further research plans, I right now hesitate if it's at this very stage worth doing, as COVID-19 has affected all our coping strategies, and there is also more state support available at right now. Nevertheless, the managerially stronger organizations most probably are taking it all. But this is my assumption, not fact yet. So to sum it up, I haven't compared the subsectors more than only in the first study, as the sample of some of the subsectors is less than 50. Definitely overwhelming analysis in between all 13 subsectors is not possible from statistical perspective. If it's worth now, when the data was collected 5 years ago, I'm not sure. I have to ask my supervisors. Right. Okay. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. And you also suggested at the end to do more in-depth research about that. I think it would have been interesting, certainly in relation to your fourth research question, where the purpose was to understand how practicing OP is related to the performance paradox in evaluation-hesitant CCI organizations. So this paradox between creative freedom and survival challenges. And I was quite surprised that your results showed that creative freedom and survival challenges did significantly influence OP separately and jointly. You're right. It revealed that creativity does not contradict control, and you also discovered that creative freedom boosted OP practices, while survival challenges had the opposite effect. Greater survival challenges lead to a lower level of OP in CCI organizations. So I repeat my question. Did you find any differences between the subsectors there in the fourth research question? Because creative freedom is more present in some subsectors, like the arts, for example, than in other applied arts sectors, like architecture and advertising. So, So a bit the same question, but related to your fourth research question.
Thank you for this. I did not do that, even though it's very intriguing due to this small subsample. But what I did but you could not read from the paper. But what I actually did, I committed the same analysis separately also for the evaluation-friendly organization, and it didn't work. So that the model created, the similar kind of model created based on the data from evaluation-friendly organization didn't work. So this finding that the low level of survival challenges accompanied with high level of creative freedom is relevant to only those organizations who are really not eager to measure performance. Unfortunately, I cannot report on the differences of subsectors at this stage. But it's definitely interesting for the further research, I do agree. Thank you.
Yes, unfortunately, I only heard partially your response because there was a problem with the sound, but no problem. I hope we can have a discussion also later when we meet each other in person during conferences. I have two more questions, but I look a bit at the time, if that is still possible to ask them. So, my first remark is about your position. I think one of my main critiques is that you, as a PhD candidate, is looking at the use of OP in a normative way. Your whole study is based on your assumption that organizations that practice strategic management perform better, both financially and non-financially, than organizations that are less performance management driven. Although the focus of your research was not to look at a correlation between the use of OP and the success, the financial and non-financial success of CCI, you suggest that a systematically implementation of OP also contributes to the improvement of an organization and its performance towards being successful, sustainable, and gaining competitive advantages. By doing that, you ignore the fact that OP may have a negative impact as well, because rules and procedures can lead to conformity and lack of creativity and innovation, excessive control, lack of autonomy, and as I said already, no favorable conditions for innovation. So do you think your results would have been different if you had taken these possible negative effects into account?
Thank you very much. It is intriguing question, and I can only respond hypothetically, right? Because the statistic, how is it called, white lie, or I was the master of interpreting my own data. I would say that perhaps a balanced view, in this sense that collecting also the examples where organizations have been overloaded with whatever rules and obligations and how this has affected them. When we look at the results of the first study, where you also can take a subsectoral look at the existing OPE practices in a very detailed level, it shows that especially the smaller organizations are not very eager to do that. And perhaps the thing to conclude based on this is that not only they are most probably managerially weaker, but they actually are overwhelmed with all these different rules, regulations on a state level, also nowadays with survival. So I would say that we don't know it. And I haven't also come across literature There, of course, have been authors claiming the reasons of inactivity in evaluation. These reasons are rather serious. For instance, also mentioning that organizations whose state support depends on the evaluation outcome are most probably, not most probably, but could potentially hide some of the results, show them in a better light. I would say that yes, there is chance. And now when you have asked it, of course, I think, why didn't I ask it? But I guess this is also something for the future research. And when I have presented huge plans to develop a tool, I do agree with you that before starting doing it, taking the next practical steps, it is highly recommended and needed to investigate this side as well. So I very much appreciate your comment and suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your answer. And indeed, I agree that it's more like a hypothetical answer, because so my critique was more on the too normative position you took in this discussion. My last question is also a more open question, and it's about the role of policy and subsidies. You write on page 42, CCI organizations practice OP once they are required to do so, usually by funders or policymakers. Then a bit further, you write that in Australia, OP is common in CI organizations and is even a requirement in order to be eligible for governmental funding. In Estonia, OP results do not play any role, and assessment and evaluation is not encouraged by the funders. German evidence, on the other hand, shows that there should be no direct link between the results of the evaluation and the funding decisions, as being honest might lead to a penalty from the funding bodies. Especially low-performing organizations might not be fully honest in reporting their results to cover the potential problems. So, therefore, I'm curious about your opinion about the role that cultural policy has to play in the use of OP by CCI organizations. And what should you recommend to the Estonian government?
Thank you very much for this. I'm very happy that on Thursday I participated in a training organized by Culture Ministry of Estonian Ministry of Culture, and surprisingly, now, for the first time this year, there is a call for applications for the museums, which actually takes some analytical elements into account, and it is prerequisite for applying for the funding. And I would say that I'm very eager to see how it actually works. Because as this is done the first time, I don't know if it works, if it doesn't, if the organizations outsource this kind of service. I don't think there is much offering in the market right now. Or the other way around, they are disencouraged and do not apply for the funds at all. Nevertheless, when you ask that we have this kind of a positive example from Australia and less positive from Germany, that how should we do? I can't be objective here because the way Australia has solved it and me being able to witness it within 4 months, it really made sense to me. And of course, the Australian CCI organizations can hardly be compared to Estonian ones. Infrastructure is different. Perhaps the managerial competencies are higher and so on. But I would say that there is hope that when this evaluation mindset is kind of disseminated and encouraged, it starts from the state level as a one requirement, and it actually kind of integrates into the organization's daily activities, and they benefit from this. And there is one more thing that you could not find from my thesis, but what has also happened this September for the first time. I have nothing to do with this. I am only happy to participate. First time, Culture Ministry has arranged 1 year cultural leadership training for managers of Estonian cultural organizations. I'm happy to be one of the 20 managers. I'm a development manager, but I was given possibility to participate. And this is exactly what I have encouraged in my thesis, this state to do. And this is the first rather intensive step, because it's a 1 year training. We meet every second week, have a hardcore management training. So I would say that, and by the way, we have performance evaluation as one of the topic introduced, I guess, in April for the full day. So I would say that what I have written in my thesis has surprisingly happened also in practice from this autumn, and I have just witnessed it. I haven't influenced this in any way, but it's quite promising. And again, my long answer, summed up shortly, is that I do believe the Australian approach would work. But as Estonia takes small steps, I would say that when this ship is turning to the wrong direction, we can easily steer it back when it doesn't work. Okay. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Professor Annick Schramme in Antwerp for her comments leading the discussion. And now I'm glad to give floor to the second opponent, Professor Martin Piber from the University of Innsbruck. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me and being part of as an opponent of this academic event. And actually, I like the style of the event. I think it's as well connected to our topic that maybe for the audience, just to explain, I was asked, I think it was half a year or maybe 6-7 months ago, to comment on the thesis of Marge, which was almost finished. And so we gave a written comment on that. Annick did the same as well. And then Marge could work on these kind of comments. And I think this is very much connected to the creative and cultural sector and to evaluation in the creative and cultural sector. Because if we talk about evaluation, usually we talk about something what happens end of the pipe. So you have something what is there and what it's good or it's bad. But for example, I'm working as well with European Capitals of Culture, and then after the year of when they are a capital of culture, then the commission appoints a company and they send a person and he or she says this is a good or a bad thing, basically. Sure, more detailed. But this is end of pipe because nothing will change about that and the year is gone. And so the chance is gone maybe and you lose some opportunities to really do something for the better. But this process was really good because you could improve and you could react to the comments. And I think this is really a big flaw of evaluation as well in the creative and cultural sector, that many of our tools are end of pipe. And probably you realize that as well in your dissertation. So what I learned during the dissertation is mainly 3 things. The first is the different branches. CCI has a very broad definition. Just for everybody to make it clear a little bit, it's libraries, it's architecture, it's advertising, something totally different. This is more profit-oriented. So not more, but really mainly profit-oriented. If they don't get enough, I would say, if not enough company asks them to advertise for them, they go bankrupt. Then broadcasting. And then we have, I would say, the more representative organizations in the cultural and creative sector. It's the performing arts and the visual arts, with opera houses, with theaters and museums. And here you can see how difficult it is for, and probably you realize that, to really draw conclusions for all of them. And probably we could think about this broad definition if it was really maybe a little bit too broad to include advertising and broadcasting, and architecture is maybe a little bit in the middle. But I come to that later on. The second thing I learned was that it was really nice how you use the mixed methods approach, and it was also new for me that you said you started with action research. This a little bit complements that story, that you use quantitative and qualitative methods, and I think in a proper way. There are no flaws in that, but you did that, let's say, according to, well, it was what the methods, let's say, provide, and then you could take out some analysis on that. And this is really interesting that you then probably realize that there is as well a big power of qualitative research at the end, what I will mention as well in my questions further on. And the third thing, and what is a little bit of a pity, I think I really learned a lot why evaluation does not work when reading your thesis. Also because of your, I think, very well elaborated framework with all that kind of variables you had in there, inside variables and outside variables, and also variables already present in the literature. So therefore, I learned a lot, and as well, I think organizations can learn a lot when reading the thesis in order to improve their evaluation. And, well, it is sure I have to pre-announce that it's really difficult, and what also Annick already mentioned. You wrote 4 articles, and we have this scientific system that you hand in the articles, for example, for a journal, and then you put out a teeny tiny, let's say, connection of 2 variables, for example. I'm exaggerating a little bit. And then the result is presented in an article. And now you have these 4 pieces of research, and it's your turn to, let's say, put it together to a big dissertation. In this way, I'm kind of in favor of these old dissertations, where you write the book and really can, on overall, prove that you really have a literacy in the topic, and that you know how to handle, and I would almost say how to dance with the topic. What is almost impossible if you have this, let's say, given 4 articles, and then you have to live with it, what you a little bit mentioned in the beginning of your presentation. Well, and then what I learned as well, I reflected on ourselves. I'm as well ahead of an MBA course, and this is a totally different field from the cultural field. And also there I realized that we business people are tool-oriented. And we really focus on our tools, and then we think, are these good tools or are these bad tools? And that a little bit we call evaluation. And maybe this was kind of a hidden assumption as well in your thesis, that you take these kind of tools, but they are just like islands somewhere out there in the sky, and then you try to implement them in your organization, and then you look how does it work in the cultural and creative sector, or how does it not work. Sure, this is difficult, and therefore I want to a little bit maybe reflect on that isolation of the tools, and I think maybe we have to break up this isolation a little bit and make it more connected to what happens in cultural and creative organizations. What I missed a little bit was that you were very much, I think you did a very good, an excellent literature review in the field, but coming, what already Annick said, coming from I would say, this tool-oriented business and evaluation world. What I missed a little bit was some kind of explorative reasoning, I would say. Explorative reasoning on the basis of this broad knowledge of literature and on the basis of the results of your empirics. But maybe I can trigger out a little bit of this reasoning now in the discussion, what would be my target. And it would be I would appreciate to let's say, if you can as well, just let it happen in this way. Maybe a little bit criticizing as well the academic, I would say, strong and tough catalog of academic methods. So my key questions, so I have questions in several directions. I hope that we can cover them all, but no worries if we don't come through. At the end, it's not that important. So I have 3 key questions in some key fields. Then I have some methods questions. Then I have some kind of a hunch that we would need a different approach in the cultural and creative sector than this tool-oriented approach. And there are some, I would say, there is some basis as well in your work, and I want to focus on that. And then I already wrote in my previous comments that maybe we should reflect as well on the basic assumptions, not only in your work, but it's not your faults that they are in your work, but maybe you should reflect on them because you took it from the regulatory framework. As well from the Estonian government, what they expect from cultural organizations. So this is the 4 last point, and then the last point I just want to address 2 conclusions, but Annick already made one of these points. So we start with the first key question, and this would be, you quoted Müller-Rickmann, and they said that somehow evaluation distracts managers, and probably you as well mean organizations, cultural and creative organizations. Somehow evaluation practice distracts them from doing their core business. Isn't this as well, I would say, kind of a proof that they think and have in mind this kind of end-of-pipe evaluation? Maybe we could think about evaluation differently in order that it not prevents them from their core business. But I don't know, what is your view on that?
Thank you very much for summing up my thesis so well. I guess I couldn't do it myself. Concerning what works and what does not work in practice in culture and creative industries organizations, I would say that many scholars, among others, also you in your paper, have claimed that one-size-fits-it-all approach doesn't definitely work for CCI. And therefore I would say that developing tools jointly with the industry representatives definitely would lead us to developing a tool or a framework that would benefit their needs and would also work there, because we need this kind of a legitimacy to be applied in the sector. And now I forgot what you asked. I'm very sorry.
No, what I asked was if it's how evaluation should look like, that it does not prevent them from doing core business.
Thank you for this. My first, not very concrete, but very strong recommendation would be that as long as evaluation is used also for motivational purposes, it could work. And I give you one example. In July, I introduced a very integrative feedback wall to one of the museums of Tallinn City Museum. It has 8 branches, and to one of them I introduced a wall where the student groups could provide feedback, either writing it, drawing it, and it could be, why not also elaborated by filming or kind of a voice messages. And I myself, I was focused really mainly on how it works and if this kind of encourages them to give feedback. But I could happily witness how excited it made the guides that had introduced the tours for the students, they could first time literally see in writing and in drawing on the wall that the students appreciated their tours and the museum exposition. And this kind of made me understood that there are two ways, like it's very, very black and white, but there are two ways. Evaluation results can be used for punishing or for encouraging. And in case we find a way how the results are not only used for a longer run development, but to do it in a way that people who are giving feedback also see it as a motivational boost for them, then they're also more eager to ask feedback. But my answer to you is only by one part of the evaluation, only the kind of audience's feedback. But all in all, I would say that as planning and analysis in culture and creative industries is constantly, as referred in the literature, it has kind of a shorter time span, and everything is done so quickly, and there is always fire, and you have to fight this fire, and then the next one comes. I would say that when this organizational performance management tool, however or wherever it's developed, provides you also some instant feedback that you could instantly develop and not to wait for a longer run improvements, then I would say that it is possible to implement to daily practices, and instead of feeling disencouraged by analyzing some online questionnaires, instead museum worker by the end of his or her day could literally see that it matters, that what they do actually matters. And as a result of this, rearrange the work if needed. So I would say that this kind of a fun and creative element needs to be there. And then there is hope that this mind shift, mental state, readiness to use the tools can improve. Because I don't think that in traditional business sector, this fun part is that important than in creative sector. Mm-hmm. I hope I answered your question. Okay.
Well, maybe one, let's say, broadening on that. I think for you it was difficult because of this many sectors in the CCI area. And if you look at the literature, is it maybe so difficult to do evaluation because you look at the literature and the literature is maybe sector blind? Because usually 80% of the literature, maybe you can say about your impression, is it focused on one, so each piece of literature is probably focused on one branch. So it's either performing arts or it's visual arts or it's architecture. And therefore, the user, and if you want to implement that what is in the literature, then maybe you fail because you think it's a general thing. Would you say that the literature is that much sector blind, or are there some exemptions from that?
Thank you very much. At this very moment, I can only witness my own blindness, not the academic literature. But I would say that in spite of the fact that also the first study highlighted how different the sector is, it is different as long as we compare it to the traditional business sector. And then we suddenly see how similar they are. To be honest, while reading, and let's say reading something phenomenal about music industry or in something in libraries, I haven't ever come across the thought that this wouldn't work in performing arts, or this is not relevant for the museums, or advertisement industry works differently. I would say that the industries are different inside culture and creative industries, true, but I would say that the management in those industries necessarily isn't. And this is also the reason why I kind of concluded that there are two opposites and not so much more. than two opposites that can be summarized in rather short words, I would say. So I would say that no, the literature is not blind. Literature has been more specific than my work.
Okay, then I have another similar point, and the point is concerning the difference between evaluation for excellence and quality on the one hand, and then evaluation for operational factors like organizational performances, for example, finding synergies between different parts of the organization, etc. How did you, let's say, take care of this difference in your work? That you say, on the one hand, we have excellence and quality, on the other hand, we have operational, let's say, performance.
Artistic quality has been triggered many researchers' interests and have been declared to be nearly unmeasurable. How I approached it? Very easily. I didn't tackle it at all. I was focusing on the core managerial aspects, and only in my fourth study I slightly touched upon the creativity, because having educated as a culture manager and not even being able to play one instrument, haven't ever drawn a reasonable picture myself, I don't want to touch upon the artistic quality at all. What I guess, and this is only assumption, is that even though I did not tackle it myself concretely and on purpose, it's still in there, in the answers, in between the lines, because for those people answering to my responses, I guess this was full set. I myself see it as divided, kind of managerial excellency and artistic excellency, but I assume that they are very interrelated by the responses. And what makes me think like this is also the first kind of surprise that I experienced after sending the questionnaire. It is the prelude that has been printed in the first article, saying that only half an hour after I had sent out the invitations to fill in my survey, I had a phone call. Phone call I will never forget, because it was very annoyed gentleman whose name was known from me since I was, 7, 8, a really well-known culture person in Estonia, who was nearly, I don't want to use the word crying, but was very annoyed. And he said to me that what my research is about is absolutely unnecessary, is a waste of time. And I couldn't defend myself well. I was just trying to intervene, but not very successfully. But what this person said is exactly what you asked me now. And it is that when it comes to the creativity, creative outcome, it cannot be measured. And therefore, nobody should ever try to do that. And I'm on the wrong lead. I should keep it as it is. Okay, I hope.
No, I agree. I agree that I think you cannot separate. You cannot separate artistic excellence and managerial excellence. And therefore, probably measuring is the wrong approach, but maybe evaluation is broader than the measuring approach. But there are some aspects in your work explaining that. Then concerning method, now you were going through this journey of the articles and now collecting all together in the PhD summary. If you, let's say, started now from scratch, what kind of changes in the method would you make? How would you, let's say, set it up, the study concerning, I would say, the method setup, the data collection, and then the analysis?
Thank you very much. I was hoping somebody will ask this question because this is something that I have been thinking quite a lot. First, I would do it the other way around. I would start with the interviews. And with the interviews with very open-ended questions in order to understand what the problems are from the industry representatives' perspective. Because in my quantitative study, I squeezed them into the box. Is this a challenge to you? Is this a challenge to you? Of course, open-ended, there was a box to add additional questions as well, but still. When you are asked if this is a challenge, you start thinking, okay, I haven't thought about it, but most probably yes, so I agree. So I would start by interviews, creating a really supportive atmosphere to squeeze out as much as possible from the respondents and see what actually bothers them. Also addressing what Professor Schramme said, that what if it's actually not needed at all? What if they have felt the consequences? What if they don't use the tools, but they have actually tried and they didn't work? But I didn't ask about it. I asked what do you do now? But what if they have previous not very successful experiences? And then I would go to the industries. I would select most probably 13 organizations representing each of the sub-industry. I would spend, let's say, a week in all of those industries, starting by Monday meetings with them, see how they reflect on the last week's performance. I would take a look how their performance reviews look. I would get involved on their development strategies, mission documents. I would introduce some interviews with all levels of workers. And then, after this 1 week, I would suggest some kind of tools that would slightly start introducing and developing. And I would do it not only once, but many times, so that by the end of this action research, covering 13 organizations, that I could successfully present a tool that is acknowledged by the industry representatives, would work, and could be used also, why not in Austria?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And probably then, if you would start with the qualitative interviews, maybe you would find some of these. This would be one of my hypotheses, that you would find some micro practices representing evaluation which are not, let's say, comprised by our business logic, by our business logic which we have in the mind when we talk about strategizing, when we talk about performance, when we talk about performance measurement. Could you think, or if you look at the interviews and maybe it's as well the literature, what kind of practices could there be in the organizations which could represent such practices of evaluation between the known tools of the business logic?
Thank you very much for this. I would like to start actually by these open-ended questions of the survey. And there was one, I don't want this to sound familiar, I'm just quoting one of the respondents, but this was a response from architectural field, and this cannot be used, it cannot be defined as a practice, but kind of an indicator, a sign. They were told that after successful launching of whatever architecture project, if the client brings champagne and red roses this must have been a good work. So basically, this is definitely not a tool, but on the other hand, why to doubt that this was a success story then? Because most probably you don't physically turn up, you don't express your gratitude in case you don't appreciate it. There is no kind of push to do that. But about the tools, I'm kind of brainstormed by the fact that I translated a book of Gesa Biancaut, Evaluation im Kulturbetrieb, and she provides so many excellent examples there. And I would say that these are in my mind, and I can't really at this very moment come out with any Estonian potential hypothetical example when all these examples cross in my mind. For instance, already arranging your box office systems in a way that you have a perfect register of these clients that visited your museum theater today. Different kind of feedback walls that I tried out on student groups. Also gathering the audience, let's say already before the opera performance, and also keeping them in your opera afterwards, so that you could kind of collect this oral information from them and feel it. And there was this one Nordic study, I couldn't pronounce the name of the author, but what they said that you need to install a hydrometer in the opera in order to measure the heat during the opera performance, which could provide you valid information how it was received by the audience. So these are examples, really hypothetical. So unfortunately at this moment I can't be more concrete in sense of what would fit to Estonian context.
Okay, maybe could one example be maybe something like you mentioned these museums who can participate in a public call for a project or something like that. That is somehow that there is, you can make a bid for something. Could you understand that as well as an ex-ante evaluation of something that in the call is written you have to do this and that in order to do something? Yeah. Because this would a little bit go away from our end of pipe evaluation understanding.
Thank you very much. Now, when listening to you, I actually I have answered to your previous question. You asked about the tools, and I just now remembered that what I have introduced in my last 6 months of work in the museum, City Museum, we have started a system that the exhibitions would be ready 2 weeks before official launch, and we plan to invite the main visitor groups to test the museums beforehand. So it's ex ante already before really opening it, and we believe that 2 weeks is good. Early enough to introduce some changes, and just to give you some examples that for like similar kind of activities before have made the museums to change the font of the like relevant information on the walls, and also there was one exhibition for kids. Where this information was provided above their eye level, that the poor kids, even when they could read, they couldn't reach reading. So basically, step 1, define very clearly who is your target group, step into the shoes of them, and then nearly literally walk inside these shoes in the performance hall, and this was could provide you good tool for planning and later on for evaluating. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. You also write, now I want to, let's say, reflect a little bit on these basic assumptions behind the regulatory framework. Mm-hmm. Maybe we make only one question out of that because there are several points, and I think I wrote some of them in my comments, in my previous comments as well. The first one is competitiveness, that I think there is some kind of the hidden assumption in the regulatory framework, competitiveness is good. And all cultural and creative organizations need competitiveness to be good. I wanted you to a little bit reflect if there is something as well beyond competitiveness, what could lead to a good performance, because it was in your assumption as well, in your questionnaire, it was difficult for them to argue around that. Mm-hmm. It was difficult for a cultural organization. No, we are not that much into competitiveness. It was not a possibility. Maybe this would have been a possibility to improve that. But probably this could have been kind of difficult for the evaluation hesitant organizations that they have another conceptualization than competitiveness. So that could be one of my assumptions, but maybe you can comment on that. And the second part is the business logic. You quote as well, often the business logic is not appreciated by the employees in CCI organizations, and even management terminology like quality or strategy are avoided. The question is it really the aim, or can it be the aim of the regulatory framework to, let's say, press this business logic in the cultural organizations, and maybe do I destroy something with that? And what could that be? Did you realize that when you were analyzing the data?
Thank you very much for this. This is definitely one of the major risks, trying to make them work as the rest of the business sector. And as this second point of conclusion also refers that the organizations actually feel that when there is too much competitiveness, they just can't cope. They even don't try. So therefore, I would say that what also came out from the interviews, that the Scandinavian model is that when you have once proven to provide high quality performance, it should work for some time. So you shouldn't kind of prove that you are capable of being competitive, being successful, providing high quality service constantly, because this short-term planning and short-term funding seems to be one of the biggest enemies of the sector. So therefore I would say that competition is good as long as it's not squeezing you and not providing too much stress. Because again, bringing one example from museum world, by the end of this year, beginning of next year, we have 2 important finding calls, and this is just too much. So basically what I'm saying here is that there are limits for everything, and you can't wait for the organizations just too much, especially in current COVID-19 times, which is a time of survival. And saying that only the strongest survive, and the strongest are the organizations that are very well aware what they are doing, how they are doing, and are also able to present it. It can also be that in some cases the organizations know very well where they are, but they just lack reporting skills, that they actually everything is good, but it's not so clearly presented on paper, for instance. So basically, I like this Scandinavian stability approach that that now I may be mistaken with the years. Was it 5 years? But there is kind of a model that where cultural organization has proven to provide high quality production, then they have funding for 5 years. But it might have also been 3. I'm very sorry, I don't remember this. But in current case in Estonia, organizations are constantly planning the writing of funding applications, and it's like constantly not even doing the core jobs, but constantly preparing to get some additional funding, which doesn't provide any stable environment for doing what you actually need to do. It's constantly trying to get more, and it's such a firefighting that it doesn't leave any space for strategic management, as the organization's suffering because of the financial situation, and currently because of the lack of customers, they are constantly responding. And this, what kind of strategy can we speak about? We could have whatever on paper, but we actually have to respond when there is an offering. And I would say that perhaps currently there is too much competition for funding, too much competition also on international level. So competition is good as long as it's not overwhelming. Okay, thank you.
Okay, but also Annick made a similar comment. She said it is the institutional logic which you were following basically with all the assumptions in the thesis. Well, also interestingly enough, in the business world, in strategy, you learn that there is red ocean strategy and blue ocean strategy. Red ocean means that you have a business model like mainly everybody else, and blue ocean strategy means that you avoid competition, that you escape from competition in order to get better clients. And in Vienna, for example, we have 2 opera houses. We have the Volksoper and the Staatsoper. Probably some of you have, I'm sure some of you have been in some of these institutions, and I wouldn't say they compete. So they act differently because they really they also have different purposes on their agenda. And so it could be, and maybe I have time for this last question. Is it more, let's say, probable for cultural organizations that they are unique than profit organizations? Now I'm excluding all the profit organizations you have in your sample, like the advertising companies, for example.
Thank you very much for the question. I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
But the question is just is it more probable for cultural and creative industry organizations that it is that their business is more unique than the business is in the profit sector? And then you have all these kind of problems. You have these kind of problems to compare, to make performance measurement, and maybe some of the difficulties you had in order to measure, in order to, let's say, know what kind of performance measures are the right ones, for example.
Thank you. It perfectly makes sense. And I would say that it all starts from the unique selling point. What is it that makes this particular organization unique? And I don't think, as my research showed, there are in quite many cases no written strategy documents. So most probably this kind of uniqueness has not been defined as well. So basically it's much easier to plan when you can visualize your persona, when you actually understand the expectations of your stakeholders. But once they are not defined, once you open your doors, trying to get as much audience as possible without really having defined who is welcome. So I guess it actually starts from strategy development and for defining your goals, defining your stakeholders, and sticking to it. So I would say that it's planning, strategy, but also kind of resistance to what you have decided, because in current turbulent times, I see there is so much kind of turning to the wind or changing constantly the directions, and this can work in a short run, but most probably not in a longer run. I hope.
Okay, that's perfectly enough. So we could think about evaluation as making let's say transparent, making uniqueness transparent in this way. So thank you very much for your let's say thorough and careful comments, and I'm sorry if I made too many questions, but I hope it helped a little bit to, let's say, bring the field a little bit further. Thank you very much. So I give the word back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Martin. It was really very, very enjoyable to listen to this discussion and ping-ponging of ideas. I think that this is something that makes a defense worthy of the title of defense, and I know that I was not very precise in keeping time in this sense, but I sort of did it on purpose, and I'm more than happy to sacrifice all the questions I might have had. But without wasting more time, I would now like to give the audience first a chance to ask questions. So for the online audience who can listen to us via Facebook or YouTube live video, please write your questions into the chat, and our academic secretary will forward them. And while we are waiting, if there are any questions from the online audience, I'm more than happy to take any questions from people present here.
Thank you. And thank you, Marge, for the nice defense talk. I a little bit continue from where Professor Piber just stopped, so I still kind of dig further. And basically, based on your first publication, where you had, when you have quite a wide or broad sample of all kind of CCIs included, and as I read from your book, you basically done the correlational analysis and compared challenges and skills, or gaps in challenges and skills, and mindset and practices. But I just wonder, why didn't you compare these different sectors you have included, or the companies' CCIs from different subsectors, and compare the answers or attitudes, you know, compared to each other? Because as it kind of went through already, or it was emphasized that advertising agency is quite different from its mindset, and probably also aims compared to the museum or theatre or opera, and architectural units are somewhere in between, which actually kind of makes it reasonable to assume that there are that kind of subsectoral differences. Thanks.
Thank you. The cross tables added to the first article actually provide comparative results also in between the different fields. It is just that I did analyze it, but I didn't elaborate too much on these findings, as my core idea and the starting point of the first article was to see, I kind of tried to make my claims about CCI in a sense stronger showing that in spite of the fact that they are claimed to be heterogeneous, based on the literature, there are actually more similarities than differences. So basically, when taking a look at these cross tables there, clear tendencies can be witnessed. Tendencies towards the challenges, tendencies towards the skills gap, and organizational performance evaluation. I didn't continue. They are not commented too much in the paper. They are not elaborated further. But as I have today heard, there is a demand to do that. So yes, I will continue doing this.
Thank you very much, Marge.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions in the audience? We, at the moment, don't seem to have any online questions, so no one in the audience who feels like they would like to ask a question should be too much worried about the time usage. But if we don't have any more questions at the moment, I take the opportunity to ask one question from my side as well. So it has been a little bit touched upon because in your suggestions, you suggested that the further research could look into why the CCI companies do not use OPE, and the question seems to be that how to convince them, and some of the suggestions you have been referring to in your presentation, like creating a toolbox or securing stability in financing. But I was wondering, is there anything else you could think about? Because the background of my question is that we know about different walks of life, that the fact that there is an opportunity, that there is information and there is willingness still does not lead to action or adopting whatever practices. So any nudging opportunities you see here?
Thank you very much for this. In tourism sector and in vocational education sector, and most probably elsewhere as well. But I have been involved myself with these two external assessment schemes that lead to kind of quality award. These kind of schemes, the tourism quality award scheme was launched like 15 years ago, vocational educational quality award system perhaps 10 years ago. And having similar kind of system for cultural organizations would, yes, create more competition, but this would be kind of a voluntary competition. Nobody is kind of squeezed or pushed to do that. But I would say that similar kind of quality competition accompanied with trainings would definitely be one thing that the state could consider. And let me briefly introduce how it works in tourism award competition and vocational award. So basically, there are trainings for the developers. It may be few people from the organization. Sometimes it's only one. They are first trained, and this training starts from a grassroots level. What is strategy? What is mission? What is vision? How to serve your clients the best way. So there is a training. There is a self-assessment form that helps the organizations to map their current situation. And there is another kind of template that not explains, but help them to design the future. And once they are ready with these kind of documents, external assessor or assessors come to visit these organizations. I was very happy when doing research, not research, but working as a quality expert in tourism industry. So I could visit different hotels, enjoy their spas, and write about my experience in there, how I, as a blind blind evaluator did experience all this without them knowing that I was the evaluator. As a result of these evaluations, the organizations could take the next step. And as a next step, some of these were awarded the quality award, some were kind of entitled as high potential, not yet there, but when you do steps 1 to 3, you can be awarded like in a few years' time. Oh, by the way, in social sector, EQUAS model in social sector works kind of the same way. And I would say that in this kind of pushing them slightly into the competition and having this kind of a carrot as a quality award, I would think that this could work, because these organizations who at least have acknowledged that there is a gap of managerial competencies, gap in some of the branches of managerial competencies, why shouldn't they participate in a free training when it's awarded? They are consulted, experienced mentors, and as a result, they can announce that, yes, we are one of the top culture institutions in Estonia. So from state level, I don't have a solid calculation, but I don't think it's too challenging to arrange. And benefits are evident, at least to me. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely you did. Thank you. I totally agree with you that it would probably work. It would work better, probably in some categories of culture, cultural institutions, and probably also it would work better for some specific size levels, or at least some size levels up, because one of the things that left me puzzling, and I don't think there is an answer, and we wouldn't probably need to go down that avenue, was that you also have been many times connecting using OPE with better financial performance and also even growth. But then again, at least the stereotypical viewpoint is that not all of these organizations necessarily even want to do financially better, or for God's sake, a lot of them don't want to grow at all. So it's just that they are quite happy with status quo, even if the status quo from outsiders' point of view is not totally satisfactory. So they might also be very well used to that. It seems that we still don't have any online questions. Do we have any more audience questions? No? Yeah, you can. Yeah, sure, definitely. Is it possible? Yes, absolutely.
Just one question on your, you had the hypothesis that, I think you based it on the data, that the a more challenging environment leads to fewer organizational performance evaluation. I think this was one of the conclusions. And if I would think about my experience with cultural organizations, I would frame it a little bit different. I would make sense of it like that those organizations who are struggling have this kind of tough environment. They have no time for evaluation, evaluative action. Could that be? Could that fit in this kind of contribution?
Yes, definitely. When it's matter of survival, you don't measure your temperature. Yeah. You take a bill. So definitely, and currently the situation is rather challenging. I do agree, and this is the reason why I again start speaking about the tools. I have understood that this is not the only way, but when thinking about the tools again, I would say that this needs to be taken into account, that they can't be overly time-consuming. Because when it's a matter of firefighting and survival, you don't take one more step that is out of your core business or core competencies. I do agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Annick, did you want to maybe ask something else?
Yeah, as I said in the beginning, I had a lot of other questions as well, but my question now is more building on what Martin was saying, that indeed you researched also the scale of the organization as a factor, and previous research, for example, by Francesco and Ciavarallotti, that was done was related to opera houses. So indeed, this kind of tool that you are investigating is more common in bigger organizations because they are more institutionalized and they have more personnel also and capacity to do that. So the factor scale that you also researched also should be more elaborated, I think, because when you talk about SMEs, independent workers, even nano companies, as we call them, 1, 2, 3 persons, then you really don't have the time to use such a tool. That's one comment. And then secondly, I also mentioned it during the pre-defense that the literature about ambidexterity and the balance between exploration and exploitation is also something that is much more fitting into the practice of these creative organizations, I think.
Thank you very much for this. I fully do agree with you that the size of organization is important variable. Also the age of the organization proved to be important from the first study. So basically, in case I should sum up my findings in 1 or 2 sentences, it literally would be that organizations where there is a competence, where there is a power in this sense that there is a staff who is motivated, they can do it. And once they are small, they are affected of external whatever challenges and powers so much more that in spite of any kind of tools, trainings, frameworks, it is still hardly possible to make them be as strategic as the bigger organizations. So basically, there are claims also in the literature that perhaps we shouldn't speak so much about CCI organizations' differences and their coping strategies, but instead of SMEs. And most probably majority of the CCIs and their coping strategies are relevant to small and medium-sized or micro-enterprises challenges. So I do agree, it's a very diverse sector, and perhaps my approach has been partly idealistic and kind of me expecting that it's all doable once there is a charismatic leader who has competencies, once the staff is profit-oriented and willing to get it to the international markets, that it's all so easy then. Sure, it's not. Mm-hmm. So therefore there is much more into it. I do agree with this. Mm-hmm.
Yes, but what is not my message is that because they are different, they don't need more strategic thinking. I think looking at also the life cycle of these organizations, there are periods that they are more relying on effectuation, but then you have a kind of period of stabilization that you need more causation logic. So it is not for me one or the other, but to have this more in-depth research could be very useful. And I think what you did is looking at, you have the tools, and do they apply it or not, and in which way, and on which factors is it depending? And that's the normative dimension that I try to make clear, while I think it should be useful to see how we can improve their strategic thinking by adapting existing tools on their reality and their way of working. So more the other way around. That would be my suggestion.
Is the first step that needs to be changed, and then the rest can follow. Thank you.
I'm really thankful for both of the opponents for the discussion, for Marge to courageously and professionally answering all the questions, and for the audience for their attention. And now I will ask the audience to leave the room, and also the doctoral candidate to leave the room for about 10 to 15 minutes of the committee discussion and voting process. Oh, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten to give word to Toomas Haldma, which I announced in the beginning, so I take back my words of asking everyone to leave and give the microphone to the supervisor of the thesis.
Sure. Thank you. No problem.
Sorry.
No problem at all. So, dear Marge, dear members of Defense Committee, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's always a great pleasure to attend PhD thesis defense as a supervisor or as a co-supervisor, because the defense is a final stage of certain academic journey where the supervisor has a chance and opportunity to observe the process and also to contribute somehow. And if I may, to generalize the main important characteristics of a good PhD student, basing on my own experience of supervision, then I would like to point out the following characteristics. First, target orientation. And second, analytical capabilities. And both of them are highly characteristical also for Marge. And if to add to that the fact that Marge is also a curious lady and open to new ideas and knowledges, we will have a triangle which serves as an excellent basis for successful completion of PhD studies, and I would say also to have intellectual pathway in the future. Therefore, I am really grateful to you, Marge, for all these discussions and the partnership which we had during this journey. And I really wish you a bright, pleasant, and successful continuation of your pathway and your professional career. I'm also grateful to another supervisor, Ülle Pihlak, for our cooperation, and all the colleagues from EBS for an opportunity to serve as a co-supervisor for Marge's PhD thesis. And to conclude, I estimate that today's defense is a rare and good evidence about the cooperation between Estonian Business School and Tartu University. And I wish a long life cooperation between our universities and between all our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those kind words to the supervisor. I apologize once again for mixing up the time, but now I won't repeat in the long version of what I said. The committee will continue with voting, and we will let the audience know when you are invited back. Thank you. The decision of the committee. The defendant of the PhD thesis, Marge Sassi, has received 3 votes in favor and 0 votes against. And the defense committee has decided to award the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Management to Marge Sassi. And as we have this nice hybrid version here, I also wanted to thank once more Annick Schramme, our opponent from Antwerp. And if you want to also maybe say a few words.
Yes, in the first place, I want to congratulate Marge Sassi for her efforts and for the results. And as I said already, I hope we can continue the discussion about the research and the value of OP in cultural and creative industries. So enjoy your day, enjoy your having your PhD title, and I hope you have a nice reception, and I regret that I can't be there. But yeah, we will catch up later.
Thank you very much, Annick. And now everyone else is free to congratulate Marge. Or do you want to say a few words first? Okay. Let me check. Yeah, it should be on. Okay. So Marge has
thank
for
you
a few
very
words.
much, Professor Schramme, Professor Piber, the committee. I just wanted to say something that we all know, that it takes a village to raise a kid, and it has taken academia village to transform me from a PhD student to a PhD, and I'm sincerely thankful for EBS, for Tartu University. I also took some courses from Tallinn University and Australia. The Queensland University of Technology was the kind of the final boost to complete it, to see how things should work in an ideal world. And I'm very, very thank you for this. And just a personal kind of remark as well, that I began this journey together with my daughter. She went to the first grade and also the music school, and I started PhD, and she graduated from the music school in spring, and it took me half a year. So, but now we are almost in an equal level, her with flute and me with my PhD. So once again, thank you very much for all this. It has been a great, great journey. Thank you.
Thank you.